Hey guys, welcome back to the Prehistoric Life Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Crawford, and today we're back with another interview. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Dr. Ray Wilhite. I am currently serving as the anatomy lab coordinator at the vet school at Auburn University, but my PhD was in Sauropod dinosaur limb biomechanics from LSU, and I got my master's at Brigham Young University studying ontogeny of Camarasaurs.
So the basic question that I start out every interview with is, what is your favorite dinosaur?
So my favorite dinosaur, because I did my master's on it, is Camarasaurus. I also happen to, so everybody knows Cope and Marsh and their bone wars. And so all of us, whether we say it or not, we have a favorite, Cope or Marsh. Mine happens to be Cope. They both had their issues, but I like Cope. He feels like the more pure scientist to me, and Cope named Camarasaurus. It's one of the few. Marsh got almost all the really good names, but so it just worked out that way. Plus, I love Camarasaurus because I got to go to the site where Cope's diggers discovered Camarasaurus supremus in Colorado, a place called Cope's Nipple. And I was sitting down under a tree, and there was a rock there. And I picked up the rock and turned it over and said, that looks different. And we took it back to the lab, and it turned out to be a Camarasaurus astragalus, just sitting there on the ground, perfectly intact. And so,
wow.
So for various reasons, Camarasaurus is my favorite. That's Camarasaurus' skull right there, actually.
Camarasaurus is a beautiful creature right there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, a lot of people, it has kind of a face only a mother could love, but I love Camarasaurus. Kind of bulldog face.
It definitely gets swept under the rug by Brachiosaurus a lot, but Camarasaurus is still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's still one of the Jurassic classics out there. I mean,
Jurassic classic. I like that.
So, what got you into sauropods? Like, why did you choose to specialize in sauropods? And
I thought about it, trying to remember. I remember when I was 17, I wrote a letter to Dr. John McIntosh. We call him Jack McIntosh, who was and still is, if he were alive, the world's expert on sauropod dinosaurs in general. He, at one point, knew where virtually every single sauropod specimen was in the world and had been and visited them all. But anyway, he was a theoretical physicist for his day job at Wesleyan University. And I remember writing an actual letter to him. This is back in the old days where you took a pen and paper and you wrote a letter and you put it in the mail. And Jack wrote me back. And when I went to my first Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meetings, I went to, I saw all the names are in alphabetical order where you go pick up your tags. And I went and found the M's for McIntosh and stood beside him waiting for him to get his badge and introduced myself to him in person. And I asked Jack, what needed to be done in sauropods, what would be a good area. He said, well, nobody's really done anything with the limbs because at that point, at least, most of the phylogenetic differentiation between sauropods was done primarily with vertebrate. And so nobody really looked at the limbs. And so I said, well, okay, I'm going to look at the limbs. It was interesting because right at almost that exact same time, now one of my best friends, Matt Bonin, also decided to work on limbs. We basically decided to do almost the same thing. And when we found out that we were each going to do that for our PhD, we each tried to talk the other out of it because we were thinking, well, you're going to, I want this to be my thing. But as it turns out, the beautiful thing about science is we used two different approaches to come to very similar conclusions. And we've since co-authored some things together and worked together. And like I said, it was a lot of people. It could have ended up a very confrontational kind of relationship between us. But it turns out that, it's been very, very beneficial to us both. So it's just an interesting coincidence, though, that nobody had done very little. I mean, there had been some done, but very little on limbs up until that time. Remember, this is early 90s, so we're talking quite a ways. Now there's been a ton done with limbs, but and we both decided to do the same project. So I'm glad it worked out.
And even within that, two different approaches to find the same conclusion. I mean, that kind of helps solidify that conclusion even more. I mean,
yeah.
Now, you said off camera and while we were messaging that you specialize in primarily, like you just said, not forelimbs, but limbs and their usage, and especially Morrison sauropods.
Right. So for my dissertation, I looked at Camarasaurus, Diplodocus. That's a little tricky nowadays, and Apatosaurus, and which is also tricky these days because there is Emmanuel Shop has of course resurrected Brontosaurus, and there's some of us are lumpers and some of us are splitters. I'm a lumper because that gives me more stuff to work with within a group. But anyway, so what I did is I made models, 3D models, like I said, back in the time, these were archaic 3D models of the limbs and articulated them. And I made some assumptions about joints that have since actually turned out to be a little erroneous, because I was using the mammalian concept of joints. We have a conformational joint, so you put the bones next to each other, and there's a very limited amount of cartilage in mammals because mammals receive the cartilage is nourished from the synovial fluid inside of the joint, and so the articular cartilage can only be so thick. I mean, there's kind of a finite amount, and it lies right over the surface of the bone. So you can lay those two bones next to each other, and you get a conformational joint. I guess something like you can see here in this horse leg here, where there's that bone. There's no cartilage left, but the cartilage would very closely mimic that. But it turns out that in sauropod, especially in dinosaurs in general, they have cartilaginous epiphyses, the ends of the bones, and they have relatively thick cartilages that actually have a vascular supply, which is something I didn't know at the time, and one of those things you learn as you go. But at the time, I was just trying to sort of get an idea of the range of motion of the bones. This is very primitive. I wasn't using any of like John Hutchinson's really nice mathematical models or anything. I was just trying to use some basic principles of, we figure out the muscle attachments and muscle lengths. If we can track that muscle a third of its resting length, how far is that bone going to move, and that kind of thing. But now that I know that, it really makes it difficult to reconstruct what the actual joint surface looked like on the bones. And so it was a good start, and people have used the stuff from my dissertation and taken it bigger and better places, but I don't know that we will ever actually know what the joint surface looked like in a sauropod with a really high degree of confidence. Although I didn't think we would ever know what color dinosaurs were, and now we have found multiple specimens with preserved melanophores, or melanosomes. So you never.
It's unlikely, not impossible.
Yeah, I mean there are some specimens. CM11338 is the little baby Camarasaurus that's on display at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. It's the most complete sauropod ever found. It's missing 4 caudal vertebrae, left ilium, and maybe a couple other things, but it has the skull with the hyoid apparatus still preserved, and everything else. And I think it gives us sort of the best idea of what the spaces between the bones would look like, because the limbs that were the right side, those limbs are still close to totally articulated, and that's probably would be the best starting point. But of course, it's a juvenile sauropod, so the question is, would they have gotten, the gaps have relatively gotten smaller as they got bigger. But Matt Bonin and I did some work on modern alligators and showed that in modern alligators, I can see T-scan a 5-foot alligator and a 12-foot alligator, scan the forelimbs, and I can scale those bones to the same size and put them side by side, and you really can't tell the difference. They both have really thick cartilaginous epiphyses, and so who knows? I mean, I think it's possible some of those sauropod distal ends of the distal bones could have had multiple centimeter thick cartilages.
And you talked about making those 3D models. Well, like how did you do that? Like,
Well, let's see. We'll use this as an example. So I had something called a microscribe point digitizer that was kindly loaned to me by Art Anderson of Virtual Surfaces, because at the time it was like a $10,000 piece of equipment. So Art was very instrumental in allowing me to get this done. But I made the proposal I was going to make these 3D models, and I had no idea how I was going to do it when I did it and got it approved by my committee. So I'm glad it worked out. But so you have the point, and you've got it hooked to a computer, and you run it over this surface like this, and it makes these lines, it makes curves, right? And then digitally in the computer, you lay a surface over that curve. And the best way I can explain it is imagine if you had the wire model of a chair. You didn't have an actual chair, you just had the wire frame outline, and then you threw a sheet over the top of it, and you'd be able to see what the chair looked like. So that should give you some idea of the level of detail too. You wouldn't know what the stitching looked like on the chair. You certainly wouldn't know the color of the chair. You wouldn't have any of that, but you just have the basic shape details of the chair. And so that's what I did. And actually I did it. So you'd have to do one side of the bone, then turn it over and do the other side of the bone. And then at the time, Art Anderson had a $30,000 software package that he used to put those halves together and send them back to me. So I had a complete model to work with. So nowadays, this is something you can do with your phone. So it's,
I mean, technology is just advancing and making some jobs easier. I mean,
yeah, and absolutely.
So which sauropod species from the Morrison Formation do you find the most anatomically unique, and why?
Which one do I find the most anatomically unique? So if you were just comparing Morrison genera and you didn't have any other, you weren't looking outside of that at Nigersaurus or some of those other, or Margosaurus or some of those crazy things like that, I think probably Brachiosaurus would be the obvious choice. It's not built like any other Morrison sauropod. You've got the elongated front limbs that jack up the front end. You got the pretty vertical neck. It's super distinct. What I love about Brachiosaurus is when I see Brachiosaurus bones, they sort of jump out at you, because especially the humerus, and it's very, very distinct. The scapula, the shoulder blade, humerus forearm up here. So I think if from Upper Jurassic Morrison of North America perspective, that would have to be the most unique one, because it just looks so different than the others.
I mean, outside of Morrison Formation, what would you say?
I mean, to me, Nigersaurus is a filter feed. It looks like a filter feeding sauropod with a big, wide. Well, it's a really small sauropod, but relative to its head size, really this straight, wide set of teeth that interlock with one another, or it's a weird looking thing. And then of course a Margosaurus with the big spikes running down both sides of the neck that seem to have maybe supported a membranous structure in between. There's been various
debates whether it's
I don't necessarily jump into the debate about which is more likely or less likely, except to say that I doubt very seriously it was filled with, for instance, a big nuchal ligament, because a Margosaurus is not a giant sauropod. And so if the giant sauropods didn't need a big, long nuchal ligament or a big, heavy one, then certainly I wouldn't think a Margosaurus would either. It makes more sense to me as sort of a display structure.
And I mean, even within it bounces back and forth every other year, and who knows, next year it'll be another thing. Next year they'll find new evidence. Next year they'll find the next evidence. That might just be one of those mysteries of paleontology that we just argue about forever.
So when I teach, I had a dinosaur course I taught called Dinosaurs in Their World, and when I would teach about the sail-finned, the Spinosaurus or Margosaurus, I would try to find a diverse representation of artistic interpretations and show them to the students, and get the students to think about it, because since there is no absolute answer, and we would talk through pros and cons of each one, I think it makes for a great thought exercise for students, instead of just telling them that, oh, this is how it is because I say it is, to let them talk through it. I also like to use it as an illustration of how important the work of paleo artists is. So I'm not a paleo artist.
I'm not either.
I take photos and stuff like that. I do lots of photo manipulations in Photoshop, and I make 3D models and print stuff, but I am not an artist. And if it wasn't for the paleo artists, honestly, dinosaurs would be very boring. It'd be just a bunch of bones in a drawer. We wouldn't probably be quite as excited about them as we are. So, in fact, I have a whole lecture devoted to paleo art, and we preview some of the best artists and talk about their work and how paleo art's evolved over the years.
Paleo art is a very, I feel, underrepresented, underappreciated side of paleontology.
Yes. I mean, so one of Matt Wadle, my buddy Matt Wadle, and one of his co-authors, they found a ilium that was unique looking and a couple other bones, and they named a dinosaur called Brontomerus, which means thunder thighs. And the illustration of it, so of course the name got lots of attention, but the illustration that I saw in the news where it's kicking a raptor sideways, that's what sold that animal, right? That's what really brought life to the name they gave it. The name they gave it enough, got it some recognition, but it was those, that piece of paleo art showing it, kicking.
That art is so famous. It's the first thing that pops up when you look up Brontomerus.
Yes. I mean, so that right there is, that's why that's famous. But you can see the specimen. You got the specimen right there from Wikipedia. There's the actual specimen.
Yeah.
And so based on that, the wing of the ilium that's poking out there, basically the idea was it would have massive hip muscles, and it could have theoretically powered a more powerful kick. But that's taken something that, if I'm being honest with myself, I would have overlooked in a drawer somewhere and making a really good story out of it, and making something out of it, because I'm usually looking for like half a sauropod at least.
Well, even like whenever the paleontologists interact with the paleo artist, mm-hmm. like the example of the two gigantosaurs holding the sauropod, and then somebody was like, I wonder if that's possible. So they researched it, and they're like, okay, well, it can't be an adult sauropod. So the paleo artist was like, you're absolutely right. And they redid it, but made it a baby, like a younger sauropod. I mean,
oh yeah, so I could totally see that. I could totally imagine that having happened. Sauropods. The interesting thing is that, we don't. The one things I find really interesting about sauropods in the Upper Jurassic of North America is we don't have any bone. We don't have any egg sites major for sauropods. There's some down in South America for titanosaurs, but we don't have any. But we're assuming that the ones that are known are similar to what would have happened here. And if it is, then basically they're laying eggs like sea turtles. You got these eggs that are these nests that are too close together for the adult to have tended the nest, because you would need a radius around it for the adult. But they're almost right on top of each other. So that it looks like they're scooping out a nest, laying these eggs, and then burying them and basically walking away. And if that's true, you got to figure the attrition of young baby and young sauropods was probably really, really high.
Especially since in like the Morrison Formation, you get allosaurs, ceratosaurs, torvosaurs that are just there, that are like, well, I'm not going after the mama and papa because those will, step on me. But that baby one that can't fight back, that's dinner. And
I think there's, almost all this theropods would have also certainly preyed on weak
Oh, very much so.
And a dead sauropod probably supported a theropod community for quite a while.
100%. I mean, because there's not much that's going to go up against like a healthy, full-grown adult sauropod.
Yeah,
I mean, and come out walking. So
it just doesn't. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The only way I could see. Well, I still don't think it would make sense for most predatory theropod dinosaurs to go up against a fully adult, let's say, Apatosaurus or even a Camarasaurus or something. But if you wound them like maybe like modern varandas do or modern Komodo dragons, where they take down really large prey, they bite it, wound it, it gets infected, they follow it around basically until that infection kills the animal or at least makes the animal incapable of defending itself, and then they finish it off and then they eat it. We don't know. I mean, we have no idea what their hunting practices were like, because there's the only way to really preserve that maybe would be trackways. They got the Paluxy River trackway that shows a theropod. There's a sauropod trackway and a theropod trackway, and it looks like the theropod is following the sauropod, and there's the one spot in there where there's a track missing, and some people said there was this hypothesis posited by not necessarily scientists, but that the theropod caught the sauropod and it pulled it out of its tracks. I think that might be reading a little too much into that trackway, but there's no evidence that the sauropod stopped walking or died or anything like that.
And I mean, it was probably very unlikely, especially if sauropods herded together, that they would go after the ones that are all clumped up together, because that would be like basically a house cat trying to tackle down like a full-grown cow in the middle of a stampede.
And there's really, at least for diplodocids, there's really good evidence that they were at least traveling in groups of 5 or 6, because the Purgatory River site is probably the most classic one. And if you look at it from the air, you've got, if I remember right, it's 5 trackways, and they're perfectly parallel to one another. And you can tell it's a diplodocid because the tracks are right on the left and right tracks are almost overlying the midline, which you don't see in any of the macronarians like Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus, or Titanosaurs or anything. But they're perfectly parallel and they never cross each other. So I always show that to students. I tell the students that I'm not a track guy, as far as I'm not a track expert. Like I don't study them necessarily, but tracks are intriguing to me because they are fossils of a living thing. They're the fossils of a moment in time of a living organism. They're not dead bones lying in a pit somewhere.
It shows action.
Yeah, it shows action if you have enough of them. Yeah. And so I asked the students, I said, so what does this tell you about these sauropods? And almost all of them get it immediately. They're like, well, if they don't cross, the trackways don't cross each other, they must have been lined up side by side and walking together. And so I think that's, the trackway data is really good evidence of herding, and of not necessarily all the same size sauropods either. There's some trackways that show multiple sizes, and I think there's one, oh my gosh, it's been a long time ago, so I can't remember the paper. I should be more prepared, but where you got a little sauropod track inside of a big sauropod track, really big sauropod track from South America, but I can't remember the exact one. But a lot of and there's a lot of places like the Wyoming Dinosaur Center has a couple of sites where there's so many footprints. They call it dino turbation, because there's so many dinosaur footprints on top of one another, so many sauropod footprints on top of one another, that they've just churned what would have been, I guess, probably mud at the time, just turns it into a massive one footprint. And in fact, there were clearly bones that had been buried there before they tromped on them, and you can find where they stomped on them and bent the bones, and that's an interesting site as well.
So, speaking of that, what does the fossil evidence suggest about the diversity and coexistence of sauropods like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and Brachiosaurus?
Yeah, so we know that we find all of those taxa together in one general area. So Dry Mesa Quarry that we have from Mesa, Colorado, we have a brachiosaur, we have Supersaurus, we have Apatosaurus, we have what I think is going to still stay Diplodocus. So there are three similar animals: Gallimiopus, Catadocus, and Diplodocus. At the moment, Suasia even. The limb, it makes me a bit sad because I can't tell the limbs apart in some regions of the body for those. But anyway, Dr. Brian Curtis has a hypothesis, and I tend to agree that there's this northern fauna of diplodocus like that has like Gallimiopus and Catadocus, and there's a southern fauna that includes Diplodocus. Either way, we have at least 6 or 7 different kinds in that quarry. So the question always is though, did those animals all coexist in that ecosystem? Did they come through it? Were they migrating through at different times? Were they all exploiting the same resource in that one area at the same time? Probably the most straightforward scenarios, they all lived there together and they all died there at various times together. But it's easy to understand. I think it's easy to understand how diplodocids like Apatosaurus and Diplodocus differ from this guy. If I had my Diplodocus skull, I'd show you. But Diplodocus has these little tiny pencil-shaped teeth. They're clearly made for.
Not a Diplodocus, but it's an Apatosaurus.
That's really good. So you can see those pencil-shaped teeth, and the markings on the teeth, the little grooves in the teeth show that they probably bit down and pulled back, and they've got to be eating. Chances are they're not eating the roughest, toughest forage out there. Whereas this Camarasaurus here has giant spoons for teeth. They didn't work like spoons, but they look like spoons. And those suckers, that animal could eat anything it wanted.
And I mean, do you think there's any possibility of, obviously probably not, different species like procreating, but like them living together? Do you think there's any possibility of like some lone Camarasaur accidentally getting and mixed up into a herd of like Diplodocus, and then they're just like, you look similar enough, I'll hang out with y'all?
Well, if you believe the paleo art, of course, there's not a paleo art of the Morrison Formation, and the big picture Morrison Formation doesn't have them all walking across the plains together. It's interesting you say that, because I was in Namibia just a few months ago, and I got to go to Etosha National Park, and I got to actually see how herds of animals interact with one another. And I remember seeing the springbok, which is a little antelope, they're the most common animal, probably most common large mammal in the park. And I'd see these herds of springbok, and in the middle there would be 1 or 2 wildebeest here or there. And of course, everybody knows wildebeest are famous for their big mass migration, where they migrate in giant herds. But while they're hanging out here in this park, you see a couple of these random wildebeest in with these springbok. And I saw that with, there's black-faced impalas around there, and you could see up to 2 or 3 antelope species at the same time in the same general area. And I don't see a reason why that couldn't happen. And especially, so you got to figure that if we have the bones preserved, there was water there. Normally, it's going to either be a fluvial environment like a river channel, or it's going to be something like a watering hole. And at Etosha, so I was there during the rainy season, or they were having unusually heavy rains, and so the water holes weren't quite as densely packed as they would be when it wasn't. But you can see pictures. You can look up Etosha, you can type it in and look it up, and you can find probably 10 species of megafauna all there around the one water hole together, because they have this one thing they all have to do, and that's drink. And they don't have any choice but to drink with their neighbors. And so that could very well be what's concentrated these sauropods in the fossil record is these animals are all, they died and because of their, in the case of dry mesa, we don't know for sure, but the bed is full of like a lot of unsorted material and bones that are we found everything from little bone shards to perfect bone, almost perfect bones. Occasionally we find some articulated stuff, but most of it's disarticulated and spread apart. And it seems like that maybe these animals died over a number of years, the bones laid out on the surface, and then you had some maybe a flash flood event like the unfortunate kind of one that everybody will know right now is the mass flooding event that just happened in Texas. So if you were watching the news, and that was a really, really sad event, but there were pictures of Ford F-250s totally buried in the mud, totally covered. Yeah. And there will be things that got wrapped up in that flooding event that who knows may end up in the fossil record. But so you can imagine something like that mixing together a freshly dead corpse, a corpse that had bones that had been laying out there for a year or two, because it takes sauropod bones would have taken them a long time to be totally eroded. And so I can see that as being the mechanism for why we find them all mixed up together. It could be that the Diplodocus herd was traveling through in the spring, and the Camarasaurus maybe were traveling back the other way in the winter. There's no way for us to know is what I'm getting at. So, but I don't see a reason why they couldn't coexist. Like I say, if you go to, you can see it. If you use modern analogs, you can see it in the megafauna in Africa. So I mean, especially when you take multiple different species of antelope. So, you had hartebeest, you had elands, black-faced impalas, springbok, all within occasionally you could look out and see them all at one time. And so, I don't see, I don't know my antelope biology. I'm sure there's some resource partitioning there, but I am not an antelope specialist, so I'm not going to pretend like I know that. But I don't see why they couldn't. I think they probably did.
Because I mean, it, like you said, like watering holes, it's probably also not unlikely that because it wasn't like there was one group of apatosaurs and then one group of camarasaurs. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of groups of them split up everywhere. And I mean, there's it's almost more impossible to think that two groups of two different species never cross paths.
Oh yeah, I think it would take way more. You would have to. It would be way less likely that none cross their paths than that multiple ones cross paths on a regular basis. I mean, I think it would. I haven't seen any. I don't know. I'm sure somebody's done an illustration, but I think it would be cool to see one where you've got the sort of the patasaurs over here and the camarasaurs over here, and maybe a couple of brachiosaurs. Brachiosaurs are relatively uncommon in the Morrison Formation. So Brachiosaurus is it's just not out there everywhere. Camarasaurus, I still think Camarasaurus is the most common genus, unless of course somebody splits them up into multiple genera in the near future, like they did with the Diplodocus. But I still think they're the most common. Then probably Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, and then you get things like Brachiosaurus and Haplocanthosaurus that are rarer. And so, it's in Africa, it would be the equivalent of maybe say some of the big, some of the big gazelles and like giraffe and elephant and rhinos. So rhinos I got to see both black and white rhinos while I was there, but I saw, 4 black rhino at a watering hole one night where I had just seen 200 zebra a couple hours before. And then the next morning I saw 1 white rhino where you might have seen 100 gazelles. So I think there were, if the fossil record is accurate in terms of the proportion, its representation of the density of the different taxa, I think it's there would be some of them that would be out there everywhere, and then there would be some that would be much rarer.
So you mentioned how Haplocanthosaurus and Brachiosaurus are more rare. Why do you think that is? Like, why would that be?
With Brachiosaurus, I don't know. I wonder if so. What I am definitely not an expert in is the flora of the Jurassic, and especially of the Dry Mesa area. I wonder if there were just not enough tall trees to support huge numbers of Brachiosaurs, at least in the places where we're looking or where the bones are accumulated. And Haplocanthosaurus is a really basal sauropod. So it's if you just tell somebody to make a generic sauropod, they would basically make a Haplocanthosaurus. It has basic front legs, basic back legs. We don't know what its skull looks like, but I bet you when we do find it, it will be somewhere between a Camarasaurus and a Diplodocus. It's going to be a very, I think it's as vanilla as sauropods come. It's a cool sauropod, but we've written several papers here recently on it. I've been co-author on, but and it's more. We found more specimens than were previously. We kind of shown that there's a decent number of specimens, but it's nothing like the number of Camarasaurus specimens. And I don't know, but since Haplocanthosaurus is, like I said, just vanilla sauropod, you would think it would be really numerous, but from what we can tell, it's not. So I don't know how to explain that one. I can, like I said, I can come up with a plausible scenario for Brachiosaurus, although I guarantee you, if you talk to 5 of us, we can all come up with a different plausible scenario. That's the beauty and the painful thing about paleontology. There are just many answers we cannot know for sure. And we probably will never know for sure. But
how well preserved are the limb elements of Morrison Formation sites compared to axial skeletons like vertebra and ribs and
the
rest of it?
It's funny you mentioned that. So this back here, this humerus is about as pretty as you could want. I've got pelvis sliding everywhere. But this one is about as nice as you could want. It has all the 3D stuff. It's got a little breakage, as you can see. This is obviously a cast, not the real one. But they come everything from that to just crushed flat. Right now, Dr. Brian Curtis and I are working on a paper to quantify distortion and completeness of sauropod bones in general, both the limb bones and the vertebrae. And we've come up, basically, the plan, the scheme I'm proposing is based on deformation along different axes of the bones. And deformation along the long axis, so in other words, crushing flat, is probably the most common. But it really depends on the quarry. So Dry Mesa quarry is one of those quarries where it's kind of feast or famine. You see everything from bones that have been twisted and torqued like that, pulled apart, to bones that are just absolutely perfect. Like we have one, a diplodocid brain case from there that's about as pretty as you could possibly want. Vertebrae, though, because sauropod vertebrae have all of the laminae, the struts that are used to strengthen the vertebrae, and they seem to be built to be as light as possible, it means that they're just so crushable. I mean, they would be they're like modern bird bones. And of course, I know most of you probably haven't held bird bones, but they're super light and they're easy to crunch. It's very, very hard to find an undistorted sauropod vertebra that has no distortion at all. Whereas these limb bones are massive, and so they still have a marrow cavity a bit. So you'll see sometimes, especially femurs, they'll break, and so that there'll be a piece of it inside the marrow cavity there. But limb bones in general are preserved much, much better. and cervical vertebrae, I think if I had to say sauropod bones that are the least likely to be preserved well, it would be cervicals first, then dorsals, which are the back vertebrae that bear the ribs, and then caudals, because as you move back, especially from the proximal caudals on all sauropods, you lose pneumaticity. Those vertebrae have a better chance of being preserved, but a lot of times you only get the vertebral body and you missing the spines. But Dr. Curtis is the one who could give you the lowdown on that. But that's been my experience. I've hung out with him enough now. I've had to learn a little bit about vertebrae, and I can tell you I'm glad I picked limbs. That's all I can say. I like limbs. Toe bones, sauropod toe bones. If you can find toe bones, tend to preserve beautiful. They look really nice.
And of course, I mean, like you said, those vertebrae, they literally have a hole in it for the spinal cord. So
that's the neural canal. But they also have all these excavations in the sides of them. Sauropods do that create these air spaces. Just like birds, to lighten them up and make that neck as light as possible. And it just lends itself to being crushed and torqued and twisted and smeared. I've seen some vertebrae just kind of smeared like that. It's I don't know.
Versus like the literal monolith pillars that they have for legs. I mean,
yeah. So I now. So when you say legs, so when you say limbs, those also I include in that the shoulder girdle, and I also include the pelvis. So the shoulder girdle is composed of a big long scapulocoracoid, and and scapulocoracoids have a bad habit of being either bent or, frankly, just broken because they're relatively thin, of not being complete. And I call those scrapulas. But so when you find them, they're not always in the best shape. So they have amongst limb material, scapulas, and especially ilia, which is ilia, ischium, and pubis. That's the pubis right there of a diplodocus. Those three bones, the ilium is the worst preserved of those because it's a really thin bone. That one you showed of Brontomerus, that was the ilium. And you saw there's a big chunk missing out of the middle of it. That's pretty typical. A lot of times you don't even find that top part of the bone. And so I found them to not preserve very well either.
What are the most significant differences in limb structure among Morrison sauropods, and how do these relate to their locomotion or posture?
Well, excuse me, man. So when I was doing my PhD, when I initially put these limbs together in the computer, I just wanted to see what I would find. And what I found is that Diplodocus had the narrowest stance, so that when there's, and the way when you articulate the bones, the ends of the bones here, these condyles, obviously this is the horse, but they sort of dictate how the rest of the limb's going to go together. And in sauropods, some of them are slanted, and if the ends are slanted, then you've got to flatten them out. And when you do that, it either pushes the tops of the bone in, or it straightens them up like that. And so what we found is that in Diplodocus especially, they're pretty vertical. Same thing in Apatosaurus, and then in Camarasaurus, they're angled out a little bit like that. And if you went on up, Brachiosaurus is the same way, and then Titanosaurs have taken that to the extreme. Titanosaurs have the really wide gauge stance. And so right about the same time I was doing that, Wilson and Carano were doing their work on Titanosaurs, about wide gauge trackways and Titanosaurs, and finding the cant and the head of the femur. And what I found is that in Diplodocus, the femur has a different angle, which I have an Apatosaurus femur over there, but unfortunately it would be very unwieldy to bring and show in this context. I don't think I have one printed out here, but they're instead of being flat like this, they're angled like that. And so to get them flat, you have to rotate them in. And when you do it makes them kind of knock-kneed, and that gives them a narrow stance. So that was that was the most interesting thing to me. And I would have predicted from that any narrow gauge trackways that we find in the upper Morrison where the feet almost overlap the midline, that's going to be diplodocids. We can't put a specific taxa in a trackway, so all tracks have their own name. So we give them their ichnofauna, they call it. But then if you found wider gauge trackways, those would be made by things like Camarasaurus and Brachiosaurus. But what's interesting is I think that of the trackways that are out there that I know of, there are more narrow gauge ones than there are wide gauge ones. And you would expect if Camarasaurus was the most numerous sauropod, you'd see more of the wide gauge ones unless they're walking in areas that weren't wet. And maybe that's what it is, because you can only preserve a trackway if the dinosaur is walking in an area that will take tracks. So,
and that could be why Diplodocus has such a narrower.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it just kind of specialized itself into walking into more wet areas. I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, at least it just seems to be the ones that we have. So and of course you've got the Paluxy River trackways. That was made by Cretaceous sauropods, and they actually had a fairly wide stance, which is funny because they took the Paluxy River tracks, R.T. Bird did. They took them back to the AMNH, the American Museum of Natural History, and they put their Apatosaurus in it. But the Apatosaurus should have a narrow gauge trackway, but they stuck it in a wide gauge trackway so it would look cool mounted up. So that was so you have to pull the shoulders farther apart in order to do that.
Yeah, and then it's not an Apatosaurus. It is still an Apatosaurus. It's just its shoulders are broken.
But chances are probably the animal that made that trackway was either a Titanosaur or a Brachiosaur or something. We don't, as far as I know, I don't think there are any Cretaceous. As far as I know, there are no known Cretaceous diplodocus. I know there's none in North America. So we're assuming those are macronarians of some kind.
The only Cretaceous sauropod that's in North America that I can think of off the top of my head is Alamosaurus.
Yeah, there's Paluxysaurus, and
that's
Sauroposeidon is actually Cretaceous too.
Is it?
I believe so. Hmm. Yeah, I hope so. I hope I'm remembering that right. Matt will be very upset if I'm remembering that wrong. But you can look that up real quick on your fancy computer there. But like I said, that's why I mainly stick in the Morrison. And there's plenty to do in the Morrison. That's funny. Camarasaurus is one of the most numerous sauropods, and it's one of the least studied sauropods because it's not it's also a fairly basic sauropod. It's a cool sauropod, but it's not the biggest. It's not the heaviest. It's not the tallest. It's not the longest. So it didn't have any of the superlatives that go along with, making you famous. And of course, Diplodocus, for a long time, Diplodocus was the longest sauropod. And now Seismosaurus has been synonymized with Diplodocus. So it's Diplodocus halorum.
And Sauroposeidon is early Cretaceous.
Yes, I thought I remember that right. I was like, I don't know. I try to never be too cavalier because I have made at least one or two mistakes in my life, like every day. But I was pretty sure about that. So yeah, there's a few, but they're all going to be in that same macronarian mold. There's no diplodocids. Which, to me, one of the more interesting questions is what happened in the transition from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous that made it impossible for diplodocids to continue to thrive.
Yeah, there's some factor that made them not exist anymore.
And I really, honestly, I have no idea what it was because they were pretty successful. And of course, sauropods totally disappear from the Cretaceous in the northern part of the northern part of the North America. Yeah, like I keep hoping they're going to find a Hell Creek sauropod, but so far they haven't. If you can find more T-Rexes than you can find sauropod, and you don't find any sauropods, there's probably no sauropod.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, who knows? Maybe that's just not an area they went anymore. Something clearly happened there. That it could be speculation. I mean, it could literally be like anything.
Yeah. So I don't know. I find, but they're I find that frankly the Morrison taxa until Emmanuel Shop did his work on the specimen level phylogeny of the diplodocids, the diplodocoids, I guess, in the Morrison Formation. I felt like they were understudied in general, because for most of the time when, I've been studying sauropods for decades now, and for most of that time, titanosaurs were the big draw. They were the main attraction for most people, for new workers coming in.
Yeah.
And so I am grateful to Emmanuel for making diplodocids great again.
What evidence is there or against like rearing behavior or going bipedal and
rearing thing?
Sauropods?
Yeah, so the first thing if somebody says it's absolutely impossible for sauropods to rear up, well, then you have to ask yourself how the heck they bred with each other, because either one had to lay down on the ground and the other one walk over the top of it, or one had to rear up onto the other one like modern lizards and stuff do. So it's crawl over its back. So I think it's possible for them to rear up in a limited way. When I did my very admittedly coarse look at biomechanics, and I made a muscle called the cauda femoralis muscle, and I modeled it and contracted it about a third of its resting length, which is sort of a standard physiological thing. It's not an absolute with muscles, but I wasn't able to get the animal to rear up very high. Maybe, I think if I remember right, it was about 33 to 35 degrees. Camarasaurus would seem to have had the best chance. To me, diplodocids don't seem like they're set up for that. And of course, the counter argument to that is diplodocid tails. So diplodocids are named that because they have these chevrons on their tails that have two components to them, because diplodocid means double beam. And the place where that starts, that transition from the regular chevrons to those double beam ones start, is also a place where you frequently find fused caudal vertebrae. And the argument was that that's where they're putting their tail on the ground. They're rearing up tripodally, so they're using their two legs and their tail in a tripod stance. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, because imagine that you had a position that you could stand in that would break the bones in your body or causing immense pain in the bones in your body. You probably wouldn't assume that posture on a regular basis, and it would.
Yeah.
So either these these vertebrae were fractured, and maybe they were fractured when they were, I don't know, maybe in sexual combat. Maybe they were. We don't know exactly what happened to them that caused that, but I would guess it's not something that would be part of a normal part of your day. Rearing up and eating out of the treetops. Not to mention, Kent Stevens, he at the University of Oregon showed that in his 3D models that the head of Apatosaurus, especially, and Diplodocus as well, naturally wants to face down. These guys they got a lot of mobility left to right. So you basically got this vacuum cleaner neck, and your head go back and forth, browsing relatively low. And the long neck then is the explanation for the long neck is it gives you a big arc to feed in. Why would you rear up in the air like this? What would this do to you? You're feeding off of a tree up here. having a neck that goes back and forth like this
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily help you that much. Brachiosaurus would seem to be a natural. I love pointing out to students. So one thing that people are always asking me whether or not I like the Jurassic Park movies, and I said, well, I like them because they interest the public in dinosaurs, and that's what we need if we want to
100%.
want to keep studying them. So in that regard, I love the Jurassic Park movies, and I got to see the original Jurassic Park on the night it premiered in the movie theater. No one knew what it was going to look like. I got to see it for the first time, and of course, the very first dinosaur that you actually see, other than the
Brachiosaurus,
is a Brachiosaurus. They drive up and they pan up the Brachiosaurus, and I was just blown away. You know, I was relatively young then. I was totally blown away. And then they had to ruin it by having it rear up on its back legs. So what's funny is, so this animal is standing there. He's got these long front legs. He's eating off of this branch, and then he rears up and he's eating off of the same branch, because rearing in a Brachiosaurus is not going to get your head that much higher.
Yeah,
Also,
because
he
the
was
front
already
ones are
at
higher.
the top of the tree, so there was no point for him to rear up anyway. So they picked literally the worst sauropod you could pick to show rearing in. I think a Camarasaurus would be, maybe that one would be kind of interesting. I could see them rearing up because they didn't have exceptionally long necks. They didn't have exceptionally long tails. Like I said, they were just kind of a mid sauropod, and I could imagine them rearing up some. And in fact, Camarasaurus lewisi that we have at Brigham Young was originally called Cathetosaurus lewisi by Jim Jensen because he thought it did engage in rearing on a regular basis. And of course, Robert Bacher, who is a pretty well-known paleontologist by the people who are really into paleo, but if you're not really into paleo, he was sort of on the cusp of the dinosaur revolution in the 80s and early 90s, and him and his mentor John Ostrom were instrumental in sort of initially conceiving that idea, or popularizing the idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds. At any rate, he wrote a book called Dinosaur Heresies, and he thought that Camarasaurus could possibly even just walk on two legs, rear up and walk on two legs.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, it seems a little extreme, but anyway, so I don't doubt that they could rear for a limited time. It does not make sense to me that Diplodocus would rear up as a primary feeding mechanism. It seems like it would waste a lot more energy than you would get from that limited amount of vegetation you could get up in the tree. That being said, so what I always point to, once again, is living analogs. You look at elephants. So elephants are they're grazers primarily. The African elephant's a grazer, likes to eat grass, low stuff. But when times are hard, they will reach up in the trees and they'll strip bark off of them, and they'll rear up to get to any vegetation they can get at. Maybe if times got tough enough, sauropod would rear up, but I just don't think that would be Diplodocus's day-to-day feeding strategy.
And of course, in the possibility of necessary defense. I mean, but
yeah, your belly's kind of vulnerable when you're reared up like that. I would suspect.
your belly's vulnerable, but nothing's going to get under you.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's so many. The original Walking with Dinosaurs, when they showed the sauropods laying eggs, they had an ovipositor, which we have no evidence for at all. But they, showed this ovipositor depositing the eggs down in the. Because you couldn't imagine how the female could lay the eggs without breaking them, because her cloaca would be,
That's true.
6 or 8 feet off the ground at least, and these eggs are dry. But if you look at modern sea turtles, they lay their eggs and they just bounce off of each other. They hang their cloaca out over the hole that they've dug, and the eggs are just ding ding, and they're not falling that far, of course, but they are bouncing off of each other. I don't know. Maybe the eggs in sauropods were strong enough to withstand that kind of a drop. I don't know.
And on top of that, that's also assuming that the sauropod is just standing straight up and not squatting down in any type of way.
Right. I have seen that reconstruction as well. It's just very interesting to me that we know so little about their life cycle. like we know the anatomy is relatively, well studied, and we can say some things about it, but even there's just so many questions to answer with dinosaurs. There's so many things to look for. We'll never run out of questions to ask. I do find that there's more innovative ways of figuring some of this stuff out. Maybe somebody will figure out something that we can test about leg laying. But at the moment, I can't think of a way to test that. But I'm never going to say never anymore, because I've said that in the past and been burned. So I've learned not to ever say never.
Do you think sauropod limb function was more constrained by body mass or by evolutionary heritage from, I guess, predecessors, whether you believe they're Saurischian or not?
Yeah, whether they're on clade or Saurischian. I think it was driven by body mass. I mean, it's interesting because we don't know what an animal with columnar limbs, but really, really thick cartilaginous epiphyses at the joints. We don't know what that would be like and how that would function, how well that would function. Crocodilians, like I said, they have really thick cartilages, but crocodilians do very little walking on land. And when they do, they're not walking with their limbs directly up under them for any length of time. So there's really no way to compare the two. It could be that the cartilage that these guys had was incredibly efficient at absorbing compressive forces, and made them, able to withstand the mass of the animal. I mean, a big apatosaur, like an 82-foot apatosaur, is the usual number you see is about 33 tons. That's a pretty big. And that's not by any means the biggest one anymore with Dreadnoughtus and some of these other things. So I think that the shape of the limbs is driven by the mass of the bodies, and I think that in Diplodocus you had like I said, with nearly vertical limbs, you had forces going pretty much straight down the limbs, and they aren't as massive. I mean, Apatosaurus has a pretty massive limb bones, but Diplodocus is really delicate and skinny. And Camarasaurs, the head of the humerus is tilted inward, and so I find them. I don't know. I don't know if the robustness really has anything to do with it, though. I think it's just the limb shape. That columnar limb shape is linked to efficient weight bearing. It's what you see in elephants, which are the heaviest things I got to look at. Now, rhinos, you see that in rhinos, elephants, and so really in hippos. So,
are there any specific bone pathologies or stress indicators in the limbs that hint at how they use their limbs in life?
So you don't see a lot of pathologies in limbs and sauropods that I can think of. I can think of one specimen we have at BYU that the humerus almost looks like half of it's been eaten away, maybe by a tumor or something. But as far as stress, so the most visible signs of would be where muscles attach. So muscle scars. And if you look at older, bigger sauropods, sometimes you'll see very well-developed muscle scars, where if you look at young animals, they're not very developed. So that shows you that there was some pretty significant stress that's being put on that bone right there, because you've got a lot of extra surface area for the attachment of the fibers that anchor the muscles in place. But I can't think of any specific pathologies. We don't have a sauropod that I'm aware of. It's like Big Owl, for instance, or anything like that. Because if you suffer a major injury to one of your limb bones and you're a sauropod, you're dead.
Yeah.
I think they would be. I've seen some pathological. In fact, hold on just a second. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to walk away, but I want to show you something.
I did not mean to do that.
That's okay. So this is these are foot bones from what was originally called Eobrontosaurus yonaping, but it's an apatosaur, and you can see that this one has a massive pathology on it, right there. This is an exostosis, extra bone growth, and probably looks like it had a perforating wound that got infected. You can kind of see an open hole right there, which is not a drill hole. So I don't know if it stepped on something or what, but the feet were encased. The feet in sauropods were probably encased in lots of tendon and connective tissue, much like a modern elephant is. And so if there was bones, that if you could imagine something getting injured and then being able to deal with it, it would be the toes. And you can see that's a N of 1, but that is a clear indication this animal lived with this for quite a while. This didn't just happen and him die. So that bone should come down like that. This whole piece should be missing. It should look like that. It shouldn't look like that.
So now you get a fancy handle to hold it by.
Yes, it gives me a handle to hold it by. So I think but this is much more normal. Remember when I told you how good toe bones look? I mean, look at that. You got perfect 3D.
Yeah, that's.
This also allows you to see the rugosities, these little pits. So there would be cartilage anchored in there, and then we don't know how thick, but you might have cartilage that thick on top as well. So, yeah, I love these guys, but they are a little enigmatic and a little less straightforward than I thought when I started this 30 years ago.
I mean, that just, and I mean, it also indicates that sauropods were suffering from, I won't say the same, but similar diseases and things that we have today. Because a lot of people don't, a lot of paleo artists don't really depict animals or dinosaurs with those like things that affect modern animals, like albinism or melanism or even extensive bone growth. I mean, you don't really see that much.
Yeah, and the vertebral column, you do see pathologies, especially in the caudals. Caudal pathologies are not a dime a dozen, but there are a number of caudal pathologies that are known in sauropods. You see, I don't know if you call it pathology, but a lot of times you'll see dorsal fused to the sacrum, an extra dorsal fused to the sacrum, maybe an extra caudal as well to strengthen up and buttress that sacrum, which is where all the muscles, that anchors all the muscles that go to the thighs are coming off of. So you do see pathology, but like in the main limb bones, the humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia, fibula, I can't think of any except that really bad looking humerus we have at BYU. I'm sure I'm going to think of some when we stop talking and I look around, but I can't think of them right now.
Like, I'm sure it's not unlikely, but it's not shown as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, if you injure one of those main bones, though, I mean, first of all, it would take enormous force to really, like, to fracture them, for instance. It would take a lot of force to do that. And even to really get down to the bone to do any damage with the muscle mass that you would have around the bones would take a lot of effort. And I would guess that if you did that, you probably damaged that animal to the point where he's not gonna do well. That isn't to say that they could not have suffered, say, bite wounds that did not get down to the bone, and then they recovered from that. I'm sure they did.
I mean, even surface level scratches don't necessarily affect the bone. So I mean, especially if allosaurs were skin grazers and they were just taking chunks out of the side, that wouldn't necessarily affect the bone.
Yeah, this is true. It would not affect the bone. So what I find, once again, I like to look at modern analogs, and in alligator, and I wish I've got some of those over there too. I don't know if you want to see them, but I have been collecting pathologies in alligators for years, and what I found is in almost any alligator over 5 or 6 feet long, there's at least one pathological bone. They live a rough life, and the males especially, they fight with each other all the time, and they bite each other. And I've got some of the gnarliest, infections in all the bones. I got examples of infections of every bone just about in their body. Breaks, healed breaks, infections, vertebrae that are deformed. And so, but they live in the water, and the organ of propulsion for them is their tail. And so they don't, it's just a different mode of life. So I would think if it was really common, we would see it pretty common in the fossil record. And I don't see it, so I'm assuming that it was a relatively uncommon thing.
What does current biomechanical modeling suggest about the speed and agility of like Morrison sauropods?
Trying to think if there's anybody that's done a lot on speed and agility in sauropods. Theropods tend to get all the sexy speed and agility work done on them.
Yeah.
I think they've used some of the Purgatory River stuff and some of the Paluxy River stuff to calculate some speeds, but sauropods were not fast. They were
tanks. I mean,
yeah. As far as agility goes, though, so certainly Robert Bacher has portrayed them as being very agile and whip with the whip tails and able to spin around kind of on a dime. I don't know how agile they would be. I can imagine young ones being obviously way more agile than adults.
Very much so. I mean, they're just tinier, so there's less weight to move around.
What I will say is that people will underestimate elephants a lot of times, and you say this is a big animal. What's this big animal? He's out there. He can't, and they can move when they want to. They can move, and they can get on you and do bad things to you really quickly. So I wouldn't think sauropods would be that different. Their day-to-day life, though, they're going to be taking life pretty slow. They're going to be migrating or moving relatively slow. And the other thing I tell the students about trackway data. So I love trackways. Like I said, I love tracks. But one of the things people always ask is how fast are theropods? Well, I think the fastest indication that we've gotten from a trackway is, I believe, 25 miles an hour, if I remember right, for a relatively small theropod. But 99.9% of the time, none of these animals are going to be running. And so your chances of preserving a trackway of them running is very, very low. Same thing with sauropods. So we don't have any trackways of running sauropods, but that doesn't mean
they couldn't. Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't. That doesn't mean they couldn't. And we have to also remember it wasn't, well, for me, it's for you, they've always been on land. But when I was a kid, they were just pulling them out of the water. And, when I was a little kid, all the dinosaur books I had, they were up to their belly in the water, and they had to be supported in the water because they couldn't support their weight on land. So we've got them on the land now. There's nothing to say that we're not severely underestimating their agility.
Yeah, I mean, and especially like there's like very few reasons that you would make a sauropod run. Right. 1, you spook it. 2, you chase it. 3, it has to chase you.
And of course, you can. Was it the Kong's that King Kong movie that was made by Peter Jackson? They've got a sauropod stampede in there. That's no specific sauropod, just a general sauropod. But he figured out a way in CGI to make them look like they had the ability to move fast. And you can certainly imagine something spooking a herd of sauropods and them moving away in a rapid manner and resembling a stampede. So
you made the analogy to modern elephants, and I mean, even within that, I mean, modern elephants will kind of chase off packs of lions near areas because they know the threat of possibility of lions. I'm sure to an extent sauropods had some kind of way of doing that to allosaurs or ceratosaurs or torvosaurs.
Sure. I mean, sure. And there's lots of things we don't know. Like, for instance, we have no idea what could a sauropod smell. Could they smell a predator? Did they have really good hearing? Could they hear the predators?
How good was their vision? I mean,
how good was their vision? My intuition about their vision is it was probably pretty poor, because modern herbivores. So this is one of the things I love about being a veterinary anatomist, or being an anatomist of extant things in general, is you see trends in extant things that you can I think you can extract in the fossil record. And prey species, typically prey species, they have a big peripheral vision. They have almost no binocular vision. And some of them don't have the world's best vision, because it turns out you don't really need a big field of 3D vision and high resolution vision to eat a plant. The plant's not going anywhere. So,
yeah,
and there's no reason for you to do that. But I would not be surprised if they had like let's say a 280 degree range of vision.
So they also have that kind of 360 vision, so they can see all around them at all times, so predators can't sneak up on them. While predators tend to just need to be able to laser focus on one thing instead of knowing what else is going on around them.
There probably was a blind spot in the sauropod, but that's, once again, that's what you benefit from being a herding animal. If you're a herding animal, then you only have to be faster than the slowest person in your herd, and B, you've got all these other ones to watch out for you. And in fact, I think there are commensal relationships where, I'm trying to think of specific ones, where you have multiple species, and there'll be a species that is very watchful and will make noise when they see a predator, and it informs the rest of the animals, hey, we want to get the heck out of here. So,
because I also brought the idea up to Dr. Brian Curtis. I mean, modern whales occasionally will protect smaller, like dolphins and divers and things, from sharks out of some kind of like whatever maternal instinct. It probably was not the same in sauropods, considering that what we know for their maternal instincts is basically that they abandon their children. But I'm sure if there were like smaller stegosaurs or dryosaurs or other things that were being chased down, and they ran into a pack of sauropods or a herd of sauropods, I mean, it's not unlikely that the sauropod would also see whatever's chasing them as a threat and deal with it.
True. I have extracted the brains from dolphins, and they are enormous. They make our brains look small. They have, a big dolphin brain is something, it's a big thing. A sauropod might have a brain a little bit bigger than my thumb.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the chances of well, I don't like to link brain size to intelligence or complexity of lifestyle. I think it's safe to say that the dolphins are way more complex lifestyle than a sauropod. But yeah, I don't know. It's there's just so many unknowns. There's more unknowns than there are knowns about a lot of this stuff, and then you find out that most of the things you think you know at some point get modified, and even that isn't known anymore. So I would encourage people that if you want to try to understand any dinosaur, sauropods or any other dinosaur, try to find as close as you can that analogy in the living animals and learn about that, because there has been behavioral studies on all of these living taxa, showing, like I said, commensal relationships, herding behavior, predatory behaviors, the scavenger versus hunter thing, which is the big thing that all of you theropod people get excited about. That's all been studied in extant species, and I think there's a lot of things that can be, kind of presumed based on that.
How might we asked this or talked about this a little bit, the possibility of this earlier, where diplodocids had very narrower stances compared to chimerosaurs and things like that had wider stances. So how might difference in limb structure reflect like habitat preferences?
So that's another great question. So one of the things I've always said is when we're talking about the dinosaurs that we know, what about the dinosaurs, if any, that lived in the mountains? Because if you have an animal that lives in an upland area and only lives in an upland area, then you're going to have very rare chances for those bones to be preserved. So that's been my, like, Haplocanthosaurus. I think Haplocanthosaurus would be a very good generalist sauropod that potentially could have inhabited a variety of habitats and range of habitats. Diplodocus, I think the fact that Diplodocus did not make it into the Cretaceous in North America and seem to have, well, we're finding more and more of them now, but I really think that if we knew their niche, I think it's going to be a fairly narrow band. I mean, I don't know what it is, like I don't know if they like probably lower coastal plain kind of, would be my guess. Certainly that if you have a wider stance, you're more stable and you can walk over more varied terrain easier. So I would that would be my guess. If I was, I would say that the a Diplodocus is let's say more equivalent to a Corvette, and a Camarasaurus is more like a 4-wheel drive. I don't know if that makes any sense, because I think that I think especially Diplodocus, they're not delicate, but they're not robust. They're gracile animals with really narrow stances. We have multiple trackways in this environment, this relatively lowland, flat environment near the rivers or near water
for Diplodocids.
For Diplodocids, and we don't seem to see that. We don't seem to see a lot of cam stuff there, even though there's a ton of cam in the fossil record. So the question is, why is that? The Camarasaurs spending most of their time somewhere else. They're coming down to drink and die in there, and that's why we're getting their fossils. I don't know. I've always wondered, outside of sauropods, for instance, if pachycephalosaurs were more montane species. They're relatively rare in the fossil record. You find their domes, but you don't find really great skeletons for the most part. And they seem like they'd be a great candidate as a montane species.
I mean, that is a solid possibility, because it's not like mountains didn't exist.
Sure, no, they definitely.
So it's not unlikely that there were animals that inhabited them, both small and large.
My guess is there's a whole. I would not be surprised if there is a whole ornithopod fauna, for instance, small ornithopod fauna and theropod fauna that we just don't know about, that existed, that we just don't really know about. So
there's entire possibilities for ecosystems that we could possibly never know. Because I mean, even to an extent, just like open plains areas don't necessarily fossilize well.
Yeah, you probably, you've got, you would get represent, as long as you had animals that died on open areas, and you had even one. You got to remember, we're talking about millions of years here, not hundreds of years. And something like this flood in Texas, for instance, there are probably bones buried from that flood of animals that you would almost never see, but they're going to be mixed into that flood deposit. As long as you have some catastrophic event like that every 1,000 years or so that can put those animals in the fossil record, I think the ones in the lower lying areas should have a better chance of being in the fossil record. Maybe not, though. There's odd. But same thing. You could say the same thing for animals that live in the mountains, which is why I could totally see how pachycephalosaurs have ended up in the fossil record if they were a montane species, but just not numbers of them.
And I mean, even within that, like floods aren't floods are not as common in the mountains as they are in plains next to floodplains and things like that. So it has to be like a mudslide or something that washes an animal away and they get quickly overturned, and then that's how they die.
And you have to have deposition. So you can have a massive flood up in the mountains, washes stuff out and spreads stuff out along the front part of the mountains and that kind of talus slope and stuff like that. But if you're a real montane species, I will be curious to know if mountain goats ever make it into the fossil record, for instance.
Mountain goats are an amazing analog to Pachycephalosaurus. I mean,
that's what I think of when I know I have no specific reason why we don't have that. Like I say, there's no definitive indication that Pachycephalosaurs were that way. They just make sense as that they're built to be that kind of an animal. I could see them being in that kind of an animal. That's the question then about rarity in the fossil record too. And the same thing can be said for sauropods, although I think it's probably unlikely that brachiosaurs were mountainous sauropods.
Yeah.
But that could be the reason why we find some taxa. I think, for instance, it's pretty obvious that Triceratops lived out in the open plains in areas that are really good for fossilization.
Well, you say that it's probably unlikely that brachiosaurs were mountainous, but I mean, even the powerful front limbs could be used for like kind of dragging themselves up mountain, like big slopes. I mean,
we may be totally missing the mark on why it has the elevated forelimbs. I mean, the best idea is for most people is that, it gives them a extra reach to reach higher in higher vegetation that none of the other sauropods could reach. That is and that also, kind of bolsters the argument or bolsters the idea that diplodocids weren't rearing up on their back legs all the time, because otherwise they'd be exploiting almost the same resource.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of counter arguments back and forth about that. I know that there are people who are very passionate about rearing, and there are people who are very passionate the other way. I'm one of those people that this is what the evidence seems to show, but
I think for a lot of the sauropod species, rearing like that is, I think for the vast majority of them, it's not that it's unlikely or impossible. It's just that there wasn't a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the scavenger debate with carnivores, where it's like, yeah, they probably did, but there's a lot of them that probably also still chose to hunt. I mean, a lot of sauropods probably could rear, but like a lot of them probably didn't need to.
Well, like I said, this is why I say looking at modern analogs. So the hyena, I'm sure, of course, is the one that if you ask someone name an extant predator that's primarily scavenger, everybody's going to name the hyena if they think of a mammal. But hyenas will gladly hunt things down if they can get the opportunity. So opportunistic, and lions will gladly take a kill away from something if they can. So predators are opportunistic feeders, and if the opportunity arises, if a baby is left alone, if I've got a sick adult, if I've got an animal that's dead, they're gonna, it makes, to me, that you're getting into, the idea that this animal is only a scavenger or a predator. And the same thing can be said for herbivores, saying, well, this animal clearly only ate really coarse vegetation, and this one only ate delicate shoots. Is way oversimplifying things, because when times get, like I said, elephants are if you want to see, elephants will go to extreme measures to get food to eat when times are bad. They will absolutely strip all the bark off the trees in the area where they're at. They'll push the trees over so they can get to the branches and get to the greenery. I mean, but that's not their normal mode of life. So, there is no absolutes about that kind of thing.
And to me, the like predator versus scavenger debate is kind of a pointless one because of that analog, where it's like, if you're a starving so let's, for this example, Allosaur, and you have to either take down a fully grown sauropod or eat the dead sauropod that you don't even have to deal with. Like, they're going to go for the easier option. If there is no dead sauropod, then they have to hunt. That's the option. But to just be like, oh yeah, these are only scavengers or only hunters is kind of a very nuanced thing, because I feel like there's a lot of evidence pointing for them both hunting and scavenging.
Yeah, if you want evidence that they're scavengers, you just need to look at the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah. I mean, it is the biggest. It was the biggest, one of the biggest predator traps in the Jurassic that I know of, and you've got a few big sauropods in there, and you've got just tons of allosaurs that got trapped. Whatever was going on there, there's the multiple theories about what was going on there, but clearly there was a predator trap. And if allosaurs only ate things that they had killed, then you would only see one or two allosaurs there, but you got just tons of allosaur bones. So I think I think it's, it's like I say, it just look at modern things. When I teach my dinosaur course, I try to tell the students, I don't try to teach them what to think. I try to teach them how to think. And so if we don't have definitive answers for most of these things, but I think there are some things we can say. I think saying that this animal is absolutely a predator, or this animal is absolutely a scavenger.
I think that's a huge beauty of paleontology that is taught wrong, and I feel taken away from people, is that they're told what to think instead of how to think. Mm-hmm. And so that possibility of like kind of answering that imaginative question of what are these creatures is taken away when somebody's just like, oh yeah, this is the definitive answer that we have for X, and it's not actually like 100% the answer.
And this is once again where I get back to, I love to find the paleo art that demonstrates a suite of proposed behaviors and show them to the students and talk through, hey, does this one make sense? Does this one make sense? Colors. We don't know what the colors in a lot of dinosaurs were. So you've got artists that show all the bold, bright colors on all their animals. They show, they'll show some of them T-Rexes with pink and yellows. And then they some of them show them all the large ones, all the large dinosaurs to be sort of muted grays and browns. So we talked through that. And since modern birds are dinosaurs, and we know modern birds have great color vision, there's no reason to think that dinosaurs wouldn't have had good color vision, right? So if they had good colored vision, why wouldn't they use color as a way to attract a mate? However, if you're a big sauropod, or if you're a moderate sized ornithopod, maybe it makes more sense to have camouflage colors, to blend in with your surroundings. So maybe those muted colors make more sense, or maybe we just don't know. And we've got reptiles that exhibit all those things. We got reptiles that you look at reptiles with cryptic coloration, like the fence lizard, eastern fence lizard, super cryptic, fits on a oak tree, you can't see it. Turn him over though, and the males have a bright blue belly that they show off to the females when they're breeding. I mean, bright blue, like it's gaudy.
Like, I mean, even to an extent, like it also depends purely on the environment. I wouldn't expect like a bright lime green dinosaur to be in a more arid environment, but that's also not impossible. So like I look at like allosaurs as a good example. There probably was a lot of differentiation within color based on location of the allosaurs, specialization of what they hunted, and those types of things. So the ones that probably hunted in the more open areas that track down like migrating sauropods or whatever, and specialized in taking down sauropods or whatever, probably looked possibly like Komodo dragons, where they have this kind of darkish color that fits into their background while they kind of just wait for them to get close and they stalk and then they just pounce. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. Like color's one component, but pattern's the other component.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely that they were just one solid color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, pattern breaks up your silhouette. If you're especially small, if you're a small dinosaur, they're almost certainly going to have a disruptive pattern. And I mean, you look at a bobwhite quail. If you held a bobwhite quail in your hand, it looks almost gaudy. Yes, it's browns and blacks and whites, but you stick it in some leaf litter, and it literally disappears. That pattern totally breaks it up. And if that quail doesn't move, and you look away and look back, you'll have a hard time seeing where it's at.
And even within like other features, like Carnotaurus is a prime example of this, but like the usual feature you see is like in the upper left corner where there's just like, oh yeah, this is just what we know, just like the bone core. But like keratin sheaths are a thing. Mm-hmm. So like we were talking about Amargasaurus before. How do we know it didn't have like abstract keratin sheathing on each plate? Like,
and I have not looked at Amargasaurus, the bones. I haven't been down to touch them. But one of the things we know, like in modern animals that have a horn core, that horn is usually about a third longer, or about can be, I think, up to 2/3 longer than the core itself. So that horn core is maybe a third of the length of the entire keratinous structure, be that a claw or a horn. So, for instance, that longhorn idea for Carnotaurus probably seems a little out there, because you've got to have a bony horn core supporting that structure. But I think the two to the left there, the one that says buffalo and the one above it, those seem both to be reasonable, easily reasonable.
But like those are things that like scientists kind of, and I'm not calling out scientists because they're looking at what they got, but sometimes we kind of forget that creative side of like possibility of things like this, and we ignore that it's a possibility. I mean, even this is a great example. That doesn't seem unrealistic.
Yeah, I mean that one is clearly modified. That horn is modeled after an actual, modern cattle or something. I will say one of the things that kind of made me sad in the first Jurassic Park was when they showed the Triceratops. They spent so much time. Stan Winston spent so much time making that model. It looked phenomenal, especially when they had the people moving the rib cage and everything. But the horns, if you look at the horns in the movie, they're all fractured and cracked. They got all these cracks in them. I don't know why they decided to do that. I have never seen an extant animal where the horn sheath is all cracked and busted like that. I don't know what made them decide to do that. It should almost certainly be smooth with, the bands at the bottom are the growth rings. You're probably going to see those growth rings, but the horn itself should almost certainly be smooth. It shouldn't have big, especially like it has cracks that go in both directions in it, as I recall.
That could also just been anything. I mean, it could have been that the actual animatronic was just damaged and something. I mean,
no, I think it's sculpted. It's a sculpt. They sculpted it that way. You can probably pull it up. Pull up T-Rex, the Jurassic Park Triceratops. You can probably see it. I know I usually pull it up and show it to the kiddos. But anyway, so I like to use that as an example. It's a pretty easy one.
Picture, trying to find one that's not. This doesn't look as blurry. Oh yeah, I see what you're talking about.
Yeah. I've unfortunately watched Jurassic Park more times than I care to admit. Yeah,
well, I mean, it's an entertaining movie. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it.
No, I know. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I love it, and I still say that Jurassic Park franchise is the greatest thing to happen to paleontologists.
Oh, for sure. Without Jurassic Park, I think paleontology would be about only as third as popular as it is.
But I love the scale patterns on this. You notice that
Very much so.
so they've got nice big scales and they got small scales. They've got, you can see patches with pattern on them. I love the way the frill's done. But you can see the cracks, that cracked pattern. I mean, that makes no biological sense to me. And the horn itself looks good. It looks fine. Nothing wrong with it. It just the texture on it I think we can be as close to sure that the texture wasn't like that as we can be sure of anything in paleontology. It just doesn't make anatomical sense, because that would mean you would be opening areas where you could, if you can get down to the dermis, which is what underlies the actual keratin. It's between the bone and the keratin. That's where all the blood vessels and the structures are that support the horn. Then you'd be opening pathways to infection, and that would not be good. And so those cracks like that would eventually propagate down into that dermis, and
that would also just overall probably weaken the structure of the keratin sheath.
Yeah.
And probably mean that if it stabbed into something and pulled back, the keratin sheath would break and pull off.
It would be a not a really good, it wouldn't be a good design, wouldn't be a good structure. So, I
know you're not like a ceratopsian specialist, but do you think there's any possibility of them shedding their horns like that keratin?
No, I think they absolutely did not shed their horns. And I'd say that the reason I say that with such definitiveness, so you've got horn, you've got antlers. Antlers are shed. Deer that have antlers are shed them, and animals that have horns do not shed them, except there is one exception to that. There always is. Antilocoprinidae, which is the single group that has the pronghorn antelopes in the western North America. So pronghorn antelopes have one spur that comes up like this, and they have a little one that comes off the top. And they periodically do shed those horns. They've got a horn core underneath. It's a vertical, straight horn core. It sticks up like this, even though they got the little fork at the top. And I've seen the video of them. They'll shake their head like that and just sling that horn off, and then they'll grow a new one. But the really, if you look at the horns, the horn cores in Triceratops, you see the pattern of blood vessels. You see the vascular channels, just like you see in modern bovines, bovids, and other things that have horns cores, or that have they call that the corneal process, by the way. So corneal just means horn. They have that corneal process that sticks up inside of that sheath. It looks almost the same in Triceratops. There's no reason to suspect that animal shed its horns and grew new ones. So
I'm sure the keratin sheath could be broken off and grow back, but I don't think it would shed. So it wouldn't shed.
It's going to grow from the base. So you're going to have that. So remember that horn core. The horn itself is probably going to be substantially longer than that horn core, and so the dermis that underlies that would have something called a germinal epithelium on it. And that germinal epithelium is actually what would give rise to the keratin sheath itself. And so it can only grow from that. So you could only that covering of the dermis that's over that horn. That's the only place you could generate new growth. If you broke the tip off of it, you might not even penetrate down into the horn core. If you don't get down to the horn core, you're not going to generate new horn. You're just going to have a stubby horn. So you can take cattle, and you can cut the horn back off. As long as you don't cut into that dermis, it won't bleed and it won't grow back. It'll just be a stubby horn sticking out there.
I mean, your fingernails are a good example of that. People cut their fingernails all the time and it doesn't do anything. But if you were to rip it all the way off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hooves on cattle are made out of the same material. We do have a tissue in a dinosaur, i.e. birds, that almost certainly shows us what this type tissue would be, and that's the beak. So the beak in birds, that's a keratinous tissue as well. And it, pretty much grows the same way. You can trim the beaks in birds. So like if you got a cetacine, a parrot that has an overgrown beak, you can trim that beak. And as long as you don't cut into the dermis, there won't be any bleeding. There won't be any pain to the animal. And you can trim that beak, but it's going to continue to grow. So bird beak is made to continue to grow because the animal wears it down from feeding. And so it has to continue to grow, so they have them. So I'm assuming that the horn is going to continue to grow. And I don't know if you see the growth rings at the base like you do in modern cattle or not. I wouldn't surprise me if you did, but it's I like ceratopsians a lot. I have not studied them in depth, but I have found the horn cores to be really interesting, and the fact that they're so synonymous. I show the students, I have a picture of horn core from a ceratopsian and a horn core from I think it's probably a bison lotofrons. I put them up there side by side, and you almost can't tell the difference.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing to that. I mean, they're literally the bisons of the Cretaceous.
Mm-hmm.
Cretaceous.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Torosaurus.
Probably a little scarier than bison. I don't know.
Oh, for sure. They were also much bigger than bison.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the biggest unanswered questions in sauropod limb evolution?
Biggest unanswered question. So the biggest unanswered question to me is, what do their joints actually look like? So because they're cartilage, because this surface is cartilage here, I can see, for instance, on this bone right here, that there's two what we call condyles. But was there a condyle that came up like this, or was this the actual shape of the condyles? And this is exacerbated by a factor of 10 on a full limb bone like that humerus back there. To me that's the biggest question, because if I could answer that, I could tell you a lot about the capabilities of that animal. If I knew what the joint surfaces looked like definitively, like in this horse, I mean, I know exactly what that joint surface looks like, and I can figure out the range of motion of this horse digit down here, because it can only move so far, because that right there is the limit on one side and this is the limit on the other side. We just don't have that kind of information for sauropods. We just don't. And the let's see if I can do this. I want to see if I can do this without destroying this thing. I'm gonna put that over there. The bottom of that's flat. Flat on flat, that doesn't work as a joint. You've got to have a curved surface, and usually you've got some kind of a hinge joint here. So you've got a curved surface on one side and a concave surface on the other side, and this is flat. So I hold it up here, you can see it, it's flat. So I want to know what that looked like, because I bet you there was that much cartilage. I don't know how much there was, but I've stared at this thing for hours, many hours, and I find it endlessly fascinating to figure out stuff about it. To look at to try to figure out things. But me and Matt Bonin, we were interested in that exact question. Could we reconstruct what the joints look like? So we did that for alligator. We cut sections through the ends of the bones, and we could not find a discernible pattern as to thickness, where thickness changed across the bone, and was it consistently thick here, thin here. We found it's not totally random. It's related to the forces through the limbs, but we couldn't figure out a way to predict what the distal end shape would be on sauropod humerus, much to our chagrin. But we did try, and I think we convinced ourselves that there was a lot of cartilage missing in these guys. So that to me that's the biggest question, because I can't attack other questions without knowing that.
And then from there, figuring that out could answer or possibly raise more questions to be answered from that new knowledge.
Well, yeah, if you knew what the shape of if you knew, for instance, the whole shape of the joint surface, you could really calculate the amount of angulation in the limb, or at least come up with something based on extant analogs. Um, so that's one of the more intriguing things to me. But I think I might be an N of one there. I think there's other things that other people are more interested in. But having stared at it a lot, that to me is one of the more fascinating things. I would just love to see a fresh sauropod bone and pick it up and feel how heavy it was, how heavy the original bone was.
Oh yeah,
because all of these Jurassic bones have all been permineralized, and they're all of the hollow spaces, all the marrow cavities, totally filled up with minerals, or they're maybe collapsed in on them. But the bone weighs many times more than I'm sure it would have when it was a fresh bone, and that's something I'd love to know how much that Apatosaurus humerus weighed when it was fresh.
What kinds of new discoveries or technologies are most likely to shift our understanding in the next decade or so?
So, for discoveries, I think Emmanuel Shop has done a ton to advance. We haven't talked at all about the shoulder girdle in sauropods, but I'm still not sure I know what's going on here in terms of, did they have furculas? Did they have it? Emmanuel has found a bone that I've always called a clavicle. Emmanuel has made a great argument for why it's actually an interclavicle. So an interclavicle is a singular element in the middle. And in fact, the American Museum of Natural History's Diplodocus is constructed with that interclavicle in the mount as well as the clavicle. He's found these two little L-shaped bones. He defines several morphologies of bones, and then he proposes functions for them. And he's found these two little L-shaped bones that have been found close to articulation, or what looks like articulation in front of the coracoids. And he thinks those are clavicles, and that's an interclavicle. There's got to be that Rosetta Stone specimen out there that shows us where it's, the actual width of the coracoids from each other and what's going on in between there. We've got multiple theropods like that, where you've got the furcula preserved virtually in place, and we really know what's going on. So to me, I think that's out there, and someone will eventually find it. I'm having to come to the acceptance of private collections is something that's actually, there's more specimens being dug up in private collectors now probably than there are academics. I just hope if some private collector finds that, they'll take good pictures and photos and recognize it and won't disarticulate it before I see it. I've heard of at least one case where that might have already happened, and that kind of makes me a little sad. But so I think that finally getting some handle on what's going on in that shoulder girdle is one of the big things to me, because that dictates everything down, right? If you know the width of the shoulder girdle, that's going to give you a minimum width for the limbs. Also, the angle of the scapula. So scapula. So if you a lot of newer bone drawings of sauropods show the scapula at a really high angle, like 60, 70 degrees. And I've always thought the scapula had a relatively low angle, maybe 35 or 40 degrees, because when you put it high, the humerus has no room to move. And I could show you, we won't bore you with that. But anyway, I think I would love to, we have a specimen that I know of. I probably shouldn't tell them details, but I know of a specimen that I think when we get it digitized, scanned in, and all the ribs put together, I think they may give us show better the angulation of the scapula, because there looks to be a flat area on the ribs where the scapula laid, or at least where the musculature for the scapula came off. And so I don't know. Those are the things to me those are big things that I want to get answered. along with just what's going on in the sternum and sauropods. We didn't talk about that at all, and honestly, it's not probably a huge interest to your viewers, but just figuring out what's going on in the front of the sternum to me is really interesting in sauropods as well.
Well, what kinds of are there any popular misconceptions about sauropod movement or posture you wish more people understood?
Misconceptions. Well, there's going to be one. I can give you an easy misconception about sauropod movement, but it's not related to the legs. Obviously, the misconception, anyone who thinks that portrayal of the Brachiosaurus in Jurassic Park is accurate, that bothers me because they, like I said, they picked the worst one to rear up. That same Brachiosaurus, they show it chewing like a cow. And first of all, they did not, Brachiosaurus would not have had mobile lips because they didn't have muscles of facial expression. They might have had, lips like a lizard, but and also they don't have the ability to chew. So sauropods didn't have the ability to move the lower and upper jaw back and forth like we do. They would have bit, swallowed, pulled it back, swallowed. They really had very limited ability to chew. So that was, I guess, a movement thing that bothered me. But other than that, just the idea that they're always rearing all the time. Diplodocus are always rearing all the time. I personally believe that's a misconception. There's others who don't necessarily feel that way, but that's one of the ones to me. I wish that we could keep them on all fours more. I know it may not be as exciting, but I think it's probably more realistic. Yeah, limb stuff it's hard to come up. Most portrayals of sauropods, even in Walking with Dinosaurs or any of the so-called scientific 3D models or in Jurassic Park, they're for the most part just walking.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't really know. If you look at the first Jurassic Park, you may also remember when they panned from the Brachiosaurus out in the distance, you saw the Brax like up to their elbows in the water. Which there's no reason they couldn't do that, but I thought that was pretty funny. There's the other, if people are looking at old paleo art, there's the Zednik Burian, very famous painting of the brachiosaurs, only the top of their head sticking out of the water, and they're in this submerged valley. Yeah, find that one. That is a huge misconception because that animal wouldn't be able to breathe. So that's definitively impossible for any sustained period of time because that animal would not be able to pull oxygen down into its lungs. Yes. So if your lungs are, in this case, let's call it 15 feet away from the surface of the water, the amount of effort it would take to pull air into those lungs would prevent them from being able to breathe. And, if you want to try, you could try the same thing, try sucking air without any kind of pressure from a hose pipe, put it up out of the water and sit on the bottom of a pool and try to suck air through it. And it won't work very well.
Yeah. I feel Jurassic Park did fair enough to where they weren't this deep, but they're kind of just wading like ankle deep.
Sure, of course.
I'm sure that's not unlikely in creeks and stuff that sauropods would pass through it and get maybe as much as elbow deep, if at worst.
And I mean, there's evidence of swimming sauropods. So there are tracks where it looks like it's just the back feet pushing off in a marine or an aqueous environment. I can't remember if it's supposed to be marine or a lake, but so there's no reason to suspect they couldn't swim. I mean, elephants can swim, for goodness sakes. But their lung field needs to be close to the top to the surface of the water.
Yeah.
They couldn't have their lung field couldn't be that far down and them successfully their lungs work efficiently. That's why when whales come up to breathe and they roll their back out of the water, what they're doing, they're exposing their lung field to the surface to allow them for more efficient exchange of oxygen. Anyway, so but I think frankly most of the real misconceptions about sauropod basic movement we've got those fixed. and they were fixed long before most of the people are going to view this were ever alive. So I'm glad we've got them out of the water. I'm glad we've got them on dry land, and that we have them basically moving around on all fours.
Yeah, I mean, those are kind of the big misconceptions that we've already answered. So
yeah. Anyway, I don't know. That's been a kind of rambling. I tend to, we call it chasing rabbits. I go one side and go the other side.
I mean, that's the point of a podcast, is to have a discussion. So
yes, sir.
And I guess the final question I have for you today is, if you could excavate one dream sauropod limb specimen, or just sauropod specimen in general, what would it be and why?
So like I said, it would be a sauropod specimen that shows the perfect specimen to me would be something very close to CM11338. It is almost the perfect sauropod. But what's the Camarasaurus, from everything we know, does not have either clavicles or interclavicles. We've never found those bones. And as far as I know, in any macronarian, well, I think there was a recent one that was supposed to have one. I'm not convinced, but nothing that we have in North America. So Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus. So it would be to find a diplodocid, preserved kind of like CM11338, but with the ribs still in place and the scapula coracoids in articulation, so that we can see what's going on right there in the chest. That would be my dream specimen. It wouldn't even have to have the distal limbs. I just want to see that chest area intact, preserved, in place. So that's my holy grail specimen I keep holding out for, and I really think one day we're going to find it.
And I think that's all I have for you for today. Do you have any questions for me or final thoughts you'd like to say to?
Well,
watching.
So I'm curious. What spawned your interest in dinosaurs?
So it was actually originally the Ballad of Big Al from BBC, The Walking with Dinosaurs, back whenever, well, not when it came out, but later on down the line when I was like somewhere between 5, 7, old enough to comprehend a show. And then I watched the original Walking with Dinosaurs down at my grandmother's, and then we discovered the Jurassic series down there, and then we started watching them all, and it kind of became a tradition with me and my brother and my cousin while we were down there. We'd kind of watch all of them. It just stuck with me. So all through grade school, I was like, I want to be a paleontologist. And a lot of people were like, well, that's a very ambitious dream. And of course you get that's not like a real job. That's not something you can pursue. And I was just kind of like, you know what? Like, screw y'all for telling me I can't do it. Like, I'm going to do it. So now it's just like, and then starting this podcast to talk about my passion for it, but to be able to talk to others about it, learn more from them, and just put that knowledge out into the world, that maybe some questions that they had that maybe they didn't know they had, or they didn't have a place to ask, they can get that answer from professionals and people that know more, in a better place than just trying to see what Google says. And I always thank Dr. Brian Curtis for this. I really feel if it was for him, there is a huge possibility I would have, if I never got to interview him. He was the first paleontologist I ever got to officially interview. If it wasn't for him, I probably could have, there was a solid chance I probably would have left the field of paleontology. But that inspiration and the ability to actually talk to a person who made it work, and to continue to talk to people that make it work, it continues to thrive that. And now it's not just a dream. It's something that I'm going to go through with in my life.
Well, Dr. Curtis is one of my nearest and dearest friends. So he's, I've known him since I started my master's at BYU in 95. And what I love about Brian is he has come to paleontology in very non-traditional ways. I'm sure maybe I talked about that, but he has a totally different skill set to many of us that are paleontologists. Yeah, I agree. Brian is a great motivator. He does a very good job of creating excitement. He tells better stories than I do. He's a great storyteller. But so you're a living example though. So like I said, why do I like Jurassic Park? Same things why I like Wagwan dinosaurs or any of those other things. They're inspiring people like you to become paleontologists. There was Phil Tippett's stop motion dinosaur show that came on. I don't know, CBS or one of those shows. That was probably the closest thing I had when I was your age, when I was a kid. Other than that and Land of the Lost.
That Land Before Time too is doing.
Land Before Time was after my time. So I was before the Land Before Time. That's how old me and Dr. Curtis are. We are paleo ourselves at this point. But and as far as like what I would tell people watching your podcast, if they have any desire to be a paleontologist, be prepared to think outside the box. So you can be. The beautiful thing of paleontology is, many paleontologists are biologists and they teach biology or they teach human medicine or something like that. I teach at a vet school and get to do my paleo work on the side. Some get to be, the dream job probably, which is to be a curator at a natural history museum, but those jobs are fairly limited. For some, the passion is preparation or field work, and you don't need a PhD to do those things. You probably, so you can do that stuff without a PhD. If you're, my passion is teaching. I love teaching. I wouldn't want to do anything that didn't allow me to teach. So my passion is students, but just, just go into it with a very, very open mind. And also don't ever let anybody tell you what to think.
Yeah,
learn how to think, and don't let people tell you what to think.
It's that is one thing that I hope, even if somebody doesn't learn squat from my podcast, the one thing that I hope is that for the one person out there who's debating whether they should actually go through with achieving their dream of paleontology, that for some reason, either I or somebody that I've interviewed, they're just like, it's possible. I want to do it. I'm going to do it. Yeah. That is the one thing that I'm hoping that comes out of this. Even if it's one person, then I've succeeded. The whole purpose of this podcast has succeeded.
Well, clearly you succeeded because the one person you may have influenced is yourself, because you interviewed Brian. So you've got yourself. So now, but yeah, I have no doubt that at some, that these, you never know what it is. My PhD. So when I was doing my master's, I was doing something called ontogeny. I was looking at ontogeny, changes in the proportions of the limbs the animals grow. And I found out that in Camarasaurus, they grow isometrically, which means if I take a little humerus and a big humerus and I take comparative measurements, length, the width, and all that, they're virtually the same. Pretty rare in the animal world, actually. And I was going to expand that to Diplodocus and Apatosaurus. And I was in the collections at BYU one night looking at a humerus, as I recall, and Dr. Bacher was there. And he pointed at the delta pectoral crest, which is where a muscle attaches, the deltoideus muscle attaches. And he said, "What muscle attaches there?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, Bob. I don't need to know because I study bones." And he said, "Well, if you don't understand the living animals, how do you ever expect to understand these fossils?" Literally, that brief conversation changed my life, because I started thinking, he's right. I don't know anything about these living systems, and I need to learn that. So for my PhD work, I worked on alligators at LSU, which ended up taking me to the vet school, and Dr. Dan Hillman, who became my mentor in anatomy and led me down that pathway. So you never know what conversation or what little snippet from one of your podcasts is going to do the same thing to somebody that's watching.
It is kind of amazing how like what can seem like a normal everyday conversation for you can be world changing to somebody else. I mean, because I'm sure Dr. Brian Curtis coming onto my podcast was like, all right, this is something I've done before and I do all the time. Let's do this. For me, I mean, it completely like it changed like my perspective of the field. I mean,
yeah, he can have that effect on people. He's very good at that.
He's a good science communicator. I mean,
he's one in a million, really. Honestly, he has a skill set that I've never seen. I've never ever seen in a paleontologist. I don't know of another one on Earth. There's a Peter Dodson did the same thing I did, worked at a vet school. There's multiple of us that worked at med schools and stuff like that. But I don't know anyone that has Brian's path, and he's a one of a kind. We're lucky to have him.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day and night for coming onto this podcast and talking not just to me, but to all the viewer and answering questions and helping us learn. So it's always an honor to get to talk to paleontologists and people in the field.
Well, it's really nice to people want to talk to us old geezers like me and Brian. So we enjoy. I know we're both excited to see what your generation is going to do for paleontology, and that's what, if nothing else, if we can give you guys a little inspiration, then that's what we want. We want to see you do bigger and brighter things than we ever thought of. That's what we want.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening and watching, and I want to thank you again just so much for coming on. It is truly always an honor to get anybody I can on. I mean, it's always just it always just fills me with so much excitement to get someone on. But that is all that I have for everybody. So have a good afternoon, morning, evening, or night. I'm your host, Eric Crawford. Remember, keep dreaming and keep it prehistoric. Bye.